All right, guys. After a long break, we are back. Very happy to have Brent Dykes as my guest today on the Ravit Show. And a little about Brent Dykes is he's the senior director and of insights and data storytelling at Blast Analytics. He's also the very cool contributor at Forbes. I've read his articles and I love them. Brent is well known for his masterpiece book, obviously, the effective data storytelling. uh, I have started reading the book. I got it a few days back. I also amplified it yesterday. But then love Brent's book. If you already have it, don't forget to comment below that you already own this book, because now I have it and I'm enjoying it already. Also today we'll discuss about his journey about obviously effective data storytelling and data analytics. So yes, that's gonna happen. Be ready with the questions. I'm ready with a few of my questions. Also, we'll be giving away 2 annual subscriptions of 365 Data Science by our partner. And before calling in Brent, I would like to thank our partners 365 Data Science and How to Get Analytics Jobs by Albert and John. Okay, I think everyone's set. Let's get Brent on board. Hey, Brent, welcome to the Ravit Show. How are you?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. And I was just letting people know that I did start reading your book. I'm late to the party, I know. The book is released quite some time back. And me being a non-technical person, I've started getting into data storytelling, obviously, because this is something which is, I think, for all. It's not just for the data folks. It is actually, storytelling is so important for all. That's what I have understood with the book. And I'm also taking a course by Kate Strachny on data guided storytelling. So that's helping. But yeah, to start with, obviously we have a few folks joining in. We have Robert Robinson joining in. Hey, Robert. We have Dr. Tariq, who's waiting and he is joined in. We have Shruti here. We have Alberto. So everyone's in here, everyone's looking forward. Yeah, the book is amazing. I can validate that for sure, Brent. And to start with, can we have your introduction, Brent? A little about you.
Yeah, I'm originally from Canada, moved to the US. I've lived here for almost 20 years now. And I did my MBA at BYU, and that's where I got my first kind of exposure to data. I worked for a retailer doing my MBA there and got exposure to e-commerce data and just the beginnings of paid search data. And then out of my MBA program, I joined a company called Omniture. And Omniture was later acquired by Adobe. And if you're familiar with Adobe Analytics, that's the genesis of it. It was originally called Site Catalyst. So I spent 8 years in consulting and worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and then started presenting at conferences and just kind of getting my name out there. And then I wrote my first book, which is called Web Analytics Action Hero. And so that was my first book. And then that kind of took me into a different role outside of consulting. I became an evangelist for the Adobe Analytics platform. And then that meant I was speaking at more conferences. And that's when I first got exposure to data storytelling, because I've always been passionate about PowerPoint. I actually started a blog back in 2008 or 9 called PowerPointNinja.com. Still up. I haven't posted there in a long time because I've been distracted by analytics articles. But I have a passion for presenting. And then obviously, because of my analytics background, I have the data side. And that's where kind of those two things came together. I'm like, you know what? I think a lot of people struggle with communicating insights and data effectively, especially in data presentations. And so that's what kind of started me on this journey towards data storytelling. So around 2014, I delivered my first presentation on data storytelling and started to evolve my ideas through several presentations and conferences. And then I started writing for Forbes in, I think, 2015. And one of my most popular articles was actually based on data storytelling, how it's an essential skill that everybody needs, essential data science skill that everybody needs to learn. And then in 2016, I left Adobe and joined Domo, and I was there for 4 years. And then and then the layoffs hit last year in 2020, and I was one of 90 people that were let go, and that was shortly after I published the book that you talked about here. So
Yes,
effective
exactly.
data storytelling. That was at the end of 2019, and I've been promoting it throughout 2020 and 2021 now, and then joined Blast Analytics in June, and there I'm leading a practice that's built around insights and data storytelling. So it's really exciting, and we're growing that practice. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of me.
Wow, this is amazing journey. I think back from 2014 is, if I'm not wrong, you are into data storytelling. So that's when maybe data storytelling intrigued you the most. And was there any specific reason why you got into just data storytelling and not other fields in data?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of other things. I've done a lot of data strategy work. Obviously, touched some data governance stuff, very light. More on the business side, I was a business consultant when I was working. So a lot of times, as we know, working with companies, trying to really define what those key strategy, what the business objectives are, what the goals are. So I've done a lot of that work, and then obviously an expert on digital analytics. But for me, that combination of communicating our insights clearly and effectively is so critical. And I saw a real need in the marketplace that a lot of people weren't really talking about it too much. Or what happens a lot of times with data storytelling is it's just a synonym for data visualization or dashboards. And I actually feel like, no, data storytelling is so much more than just data visualization. It's so much more than just dashboards. And so I've tried to communicate that through my book and through my articles on Forbes and other places. So yeah, I think it's just, how can we create some, the last thing I want to see with data storytelling is that it turns into a jargon term. And I've seen that where it's just like it becomes jargon or a buzzword, a lot of marketing, kind of positions. Oh, data storytelling. And I'm like, no, this is powerful stuff. This is stuff that can really make a huge difference. It's not just a gimmick or a buzz phrase that people are using. It actually is quite potent.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly what I can feel is so relevant that you're talking right now, because through your book as well, when I get into those, there's a chapter on emotional intelligence, and where how it is actually important in today's world. It's not just another thing that you can learn easily. Obviously now I can validate it very well, because I'm reading a book, I'm going through something which Kate Strackney has created a course. So it is kind of not that easy as it looks like, because it needs to be it sounds very theoretical and very easy for people that data storytelling, it's like there's something on the visual, you just need to create the charts and you can explain them. No, not exactly, because it should really get into the opposite party's mind clearly, and they should understand what you're talking in. If it is, as the word says, effective, it's not. If you can't be effective, it doesn't make sense. So clearly I completely agree on that, Brent. And also there was a question from George Fagan. Hey George, what would you say is the most important thing to do in order to get the storytelling right? Nice one.
Wow, the most important thing. Wow. Okay, so I think one of the big challenges that we have a lot of times with a lot of data professionals that are probably watching this video, you're comfortable with using Tableau, you're comfortable with using Excel or Power BI or Domo, whatever the tool is that you're using. The key thing is that we start off with that exploratory side, and we explore the data, and we're creating visuals that speak to us personally. Now, when we go to communicate an insight, and that's really one of the key things here, is that data storytelling is about, it's in those situations where we need to communicate an insight to other people, right? To make a decision, to get their buy-in, to get their approval, to get the resources, get the budgets, make a change to the business. That's really what data storytelling is about. So it's a lot around creating a data presentation, that really will communicate to people. And what I found is sometimes what happens is we fail in that transition from the exploratory side where we're doing all the analysis and we're creating all these visualizations. And then how do we then distill down, take out the noise, and just bake it down to its core essence of what are we going to communicate to the audience? And so that becomes the explanatory side. And I think a lot of people struggle with, they're very capable at finding insights, but then it's like, how do we then communicate that to others? And there's a couple of things there. We need to understand the audience, right? We need to understand, are these data savvy individuals? Maybe they're not, maybe they are. That will change how we convey the information. How much context do they have into the situation? Are we aligned with their goals and priorities? Obviously, if I have a really interesting insight, but at this time they're focused on something else, this is not the opportune moment to share that insight. Am I going to have a captive audience? I'm probably not. And so these are all considerations. But then, it's really taking it outside of ourselves and trying to have empathy for the audience as to how can I help them to see and understand the information like I do? How can I clearly communicate the insight in a manner that's concrete and very easy for them to understand? And that may mean taking out data that's no longer necessary, that was important to our analysis, but now when we're communicating the insight, it's not necessary. And so we can remove that. We can use color, we can use all of these different techniques on the visualization side. And then the other thing is narrative structure, and I think that's the one area that my book focuses on more than any other book that I've seen out there is really the power of story and understanding what makes a story a story. And so I introduce a data storytelling arc that basically can help you to then distill down what are those key insights in your data and how do you then structure them in a manner that's going to resonate with your audience.
Yep, exactly. I think that makes a lot of sense, Brent. And also, since you were talking a little about the book, and obviously there was something that I read, like I was just talking about a chapter that I read, the psychology of data storytelling. Can you throw some light on this for our audience? And I always thought data storytelling was only about the data, but now when I started reading the book, obviously you focused on psychology of data storytelling. So what's about the perspective, and what exactly do you say by psychology of data storytelling?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the, as I started to get into this topic and really try and learn more about it, was the surprise for me. I mean, I talk about Star Trek in my book. I talk about Spock, Captain Kirk, and Dr. McCoy. Now, if you're not familiar with Star Trek, Spock is basically half Vulcan, and the Vulcans believe in only logic and reason. Right? They basically shun all emotion. And so for me, I always kind of related with Spock because, here I am analyzing the data, kind of like he's like the data scientist of the Star Trek world, right? And so he's doing all this research, finding all these cool facts and figures. And then he would share that with the Captain Kirk. Now, on the other side, you have Dr. McCoy, and he kind of represents emotion. And, as an analyst myself, I was like, emotion, that just gets in the way. That's not important. And what neuroscientists have actually found is that decision-making is really influenced a lot by emotion, more so even than logic or reason. And so that's a challenge for us as analysts because we have the data, but then maybe we don't engage the audience on an emotional level. And that's where the storytelling comes in, because a lot of the times, and I talk about Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He introduces two concepts of System 1 and System 2. If you're not familiar with the book, System 1 is basically our intuition, right? That's how we kind of process information unconsciously. And then there's System 2, which is the conscious, thinking and analytical processing of the data. And one of the points of his book is a lot of times we don't appreciate how much of an influence and a role System 1 has in processing new information. And often it's relied, he talks about System 2 being the lazy controller. Basically, it relies a lot on System 1 to pre-process a lot of the information. And the thing about system one is it's trying to make sense of the world around it, right? It's trying to make sense of all this data. And so what is it
Right.
doing? It's actually forming narratives. It's trying to put things into a nice narrative. And that's the thing about that I learned from data storytelling is in terms of psychology, rather than just dropping a bunch of random facts on somebody, if we can basically package it together in a coherent and concise and compelling story, all of a sudden
Wow.
that's what's going to really be powerful. That's going to really connect with the human brain. And so that's why the psychology and understanding why this stuff matters. And I think that's another key aspect of my book that I think is kind of a differentiator. As an analyst, I just want to understand how this stuff works. I mean, I've seen a lot of experts say, "Oh, do this because it works," but then I'm like, "But why does it work? Why is that effective? Why does this?" And so for me, I had to answer. I had this curiosity about how does this stuff work? Why does the human mind love stories and engage with stories? And then how can we take that and apply it to how we share our insights?
I think definitely, and it will. People who already own the book, I've spoken to a few of them, and they feel that it has just taken over because this is not being explained in any other book. And keeping that, those examples which you have already shared in the book are fantastic. So yeah, I would recommend for the audience who don't know what we're talking about effective data storytelling, Brent's book. So yeah, we'll be talking more about it, but before that, there's a question from Andrew Drinkwater. He's the founder of Played Analytics, so an analytics guy. How do you recommend that data professionals first learn and then continue to improve their data storytelling skills? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like every skill, you've got to put it into practice, right? Look for opportunities to do. Here's the first thing. I've talked to a lot of analytics professionals, and what are they doing? They're doing a lot of reporting. They're doing a lot of building dashboards. They might be building Python scripts and different things like that. But how much time is actually spent on doing analysis? And I was actually shocked. I've been interviewing for kind of like people for my team. I'm looking for people who've done analysis and have then told data stories. And one of the shocking things for me was how few people actually do analysis as part of the role. So I would say the first thing you want to do is carve out time. Maybe you have to do a lot of reporting. You have to, and that doesn't go away. That's a part of analytics, right? We have to do the reporting. We have to monitor the business, monitor the performance. But I think if you can carve out some time to do some dedicated analysis, okay? Because data stories if you don't have an insight, then there's nothing to share. So that's the first thing. I would carve out time to do analysis and do analysis on a regular basis. That's the first thing. And then, it may be where you're a little bit nervous about taking a big idea to the executives or to your manager, whatever. Share it with a coworker. Share it with your team. Start to practice how at that level. And then when you build up the confidence to then say, hey, I've really got something here. This could have an impact on our team or our department or our company as a whole. Then you may want to share it up, but that doesn't mean that you're not sharing it with other coworkers or other people along the way, getting their feedback. A lot of times it's hard for us because of the curse of knowledge to not see it the way we already see it. Right. It's hard to unknow what we know. But when we share it with other people and we get their feedback, they might point out things, what, this isn't clear here. Or do we really need all of this time? Yeah. I mean, you've got a trend here for 2 years. We don't need a two-year trend. Let's just cut it back to the last 6 months. That's really where your story begins. So that kind of feedback can be really good.
Okay, sounds good. I think definitely that answers for Andrew, and a great explanation there where, how important it is to analyze first what you're doing and then maybe, start getting the feedback too at the same time. It might be very much helpful. So yeah, makes sense to me. Also, there was a question from Shruti Jain. Can you tell us real life example or situation where having good story telling skills and one where a person doesn't have the skill? Okay, so what she means is, I think a situation where one good story storytelling was there, and one where there's no skill in data storytelling?
Yeah, I was having it was at a meetup. I was actually in Hong Kong, and I was meeting with a
Yep.
bunch of Domo customers at the time. One of these customers, we started talking about data storytelling, and he
Mhm.
said, you know what, I kind of felt like data storytelling was kind of gimmicky. He kind of saw it as like a buzzword. He didn't believe that it was that important until he actually saw two managers at his company, and this is a large shipping company. And
Mm.
they were both analytics managers, and they had the data skills, so data skills wasn't a
Right.
problem. Visualization skills, not a problem, but it was the communication of their ideas. So they both had proposals or projects that they wanted to get funded internally. And so one
Yep.
guy had a project where he wanted to get funding for maybe it was like $100,000. And then the other
Mhm.
guy had a multi-million-dollar proposal that he needed to get funding. Now, this analyst noticed the difference between how these two managers went about it. One was very savvy at telling a data story for his
Right.
multi-million-dollar opportunity, whereas the other guy really struggled to communicate his ideas or his insight effectively. And
Yep.
so what this analyst saw was this one manager was able to get multi-million-dollar funding for his project, for his initiative, whereas this guy who had a very smaller budget and a smaller request couldn't get his funding from the executives. And so for
Mm.
him, this kind of cemented in him like the importance of being able to really form a story and tell it clearly and communicate it,
Yep.
in this case, up within the organization. So that's a tale of two data stories. One failed miserably because the guy really couldn't build a data story for it, and the other one did, and then he reaped the benefits. He was able to launch this
Mm.
initiative internally, that required a big investment by his company.
Yes, exactly. And I think that also solves the myth for everyone here, where people think if it's just a buzzword. I don't think people anymore think data storytelling is a buzzword, though. Maybe in the initial stage back in 2014, or maybe just when it started, it felt like, okay, data storytelling, it's not that important. Now people know the importance of storytelling and how it
Right.
is important to convey the message right and convey the data right. So yeah, that's there. Also, there was a follow up from Andrew about the last question. Obviously, so true, Brent. Lots of report building, not enough time on analysis. Very important to set aside some time to understand why in the data. So yeah, amazing one. Okay, Brent. Also, quick question from my end. I've always been one of the persons. I've heard you at conferences. I have seen you, at on podcast and all of those things. And I
Mhm.
always had this question in mind: who has been your inspiration in the data storytelling field, or just in the storytelling field, and why?
Yeah, I think when I started getting into, as I started to kind of form my ideas around data storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
I one of the books that stood out for me was it's not a data book by any means, but it's a book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick, and it's really a book about business communication.
Okay.
And that I read that book earlier in my career, and it talks about the power of stories compared to data
Mm-hmm.
and statistics. And there's a couple of examples in there that I often share. One was actually Chip Heath. He's a professor at Stanford University, and he has a communication class
Mm-hmm.
with undergrad students. And
Oh.
he puts them through an exercise where he gives them a bunch of data on a topic, and then they take a position, and they use the data points to communicate, create basically a short presentation using the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so he divides up the class into these small groups. They go through this process of sharing, a short data presentation. Now, a little side note here is 1 in 10 of those students will actually incorporate a short anecdote or story
Yep.
into their presentation. And so anyways, they go through this process, they share, they kind of give feedback, they think the exercise is over. And then 10 minutes later, he comes back to them and he asks them, how many of you remember any of the statistics that were shared? And the interesting finding is that he found that only 5% of the audience could remember any of the statistics, but 63% of them could remember the stories. And so this kind of showed, how memorable stories are. And then the other example that they share in that book was an example it was a study done at Carnegie Mellon University, where they asked students to take a technology survey. And then when they've taken the technology survey, they paid them 5 $1 bills. And this is actually where the experiment begins, because at that point they say, hey, we've got this this charity, Save the Children charity, a real charity. And they said, would you like to donate some of your funds to this charity? And so they had 2 versions of this brochure or pamphlet on the charity. And one version had a lot of data about the suffering of kids in Africa, talking about, due to poverty or war or famine. And it had a lot of data and statistics. And then they had another version that just focused on one kid and her family. Her name was Rokia, and she's a 7-year-old girl from Mali, and talked about her struggles and how, trying to make ends meet. And then when they looked at the data to see which version was more effective at getting donations, the version that focused on the story outperformed the data one by double the amount of average donations.
Oh, man.
So again, very persuasive. So for me, those 2 stories taken from that book were very good. I think the other kind of more data centric, I really like Stephen Few. I'm a big fan of Stephen Few and his work on data visualization. Definitely an expert there. Tufte's got a lot of good stuff as well. And then there's obviously a lot of great people out there that I admire, Jordan Morrow and Jason Krantz and other people like that are very, very sharp with data strategy and the business of data.
Sounds so cool. I think George says enjoying these stories about stories. That's so true, George. Also, talking about a little about visualization, obviously there's a question a bit technical from Aniket Mitra. What are some of the most widely used graphs like pie chart, bar chart, etc., used for effective story telling, and what are some of the graphs we should avoid to make things confusing, complex for the audiences?
Yeah, so this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I would actually recommend that most data storytelling can rely on some of the primary basic charts, so bar chart, line chart, parts of a whole. So you do have the pie chart and donut charts. A lot of what we communicate can fall into those, I'd say 80 or 90% of what we communicate can fall into those, maybe scatter plot occasionally, but we really don't need super complex visualizations. Often what we may need those for the exploration of the data, but then when we come back to actually communicating, we may have looked at hundreds or thousands of data points, but we need to now distill it down to, here are the 3 things you need to know. And so a lot of times we may not need a fancy visualization, a line chart, a bar chart, a simple pie chart. And again, I know pie charts, we don't want to get beyond 5 slices and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not anti pie chart. I think they serve a purpose. Sometimes they can be very effective at communicating something. Now, obviously, one of the things I talk about in my book is choosing the right visualization for what you're trying to communicate. It goes back to the message. What is the message we're trying to convey? And then looking at it, rather than saying, well, I built this chart when I was exploring the data and analyzing data, that's what I'm going to use. Well, we have to stop and pause and say, wait a second, is this chart still the best chart to explain the data to somebody else? And that's where, so often I think, the basic charts, we don't need to go beyond those a lot of the time, and there may be situations where we do have a very complex chart, and then we have to take, different approaches because we're trying to explain it. So that might be where we're breaking it down into, we might stagger it where we show part of the information on one slide, and then we go to the next slide, we reveal a little bit more information, or we zoom in, so we might break down that complex chart into almost like scenes, separate scenes where we divide it up. But yeah, to answer the question from Aniket, I think a lot of time you don't have to over engineer what you're communicating. We want to make it as easy for people to see our insights. And so that may mean going to a very basic chart.
Yes, I think definitely, going out for something which is basic and something which looks very easy. I think it is very easy to convey the message as well, and it gets much more easier to tell a story, I think. So yeah, definitely makes sense. A nice question from Aniket, definitely. And there was a question from Raymond Tan as well. What are some of the key techniques of data storytelling you like implementing?
Yeah, in terms of I talked about having I'll give a couple of examples. So one, it comes from the narrative side, then one comes from the visualization side. So from the narrative side, I think it's really good to have kind of a framework or something that you can follow to kind of, because often what we do when we come out of our analysis, we've got lots of interesting things, lots of data points that we came across as we were trying to, we found our insight. So then we transition over into how do we convey that in an effective way? And so I think having a framework, and I talk about the data storytelling arc in my book. And basically, let me fast forward. Let me give you a little preview here.
Yeah.
And just jump to the chapter. Sorry, here it is. So you'll see, there we go.
Yeah.
So there basically on this here, we have the arc. And so what do we start with? We start with the setting and the hook. And so basically we want to give context into what we're going to talk about, right? So the audience knows what's coming. They kind of know, oh, okay, so it's this data set, this time frame. These are kind of some of the standard kind of things that are happening. And then we have our hook. And our hook is going to be that first thing that may have made us go, what's going on here? That's typically what it is. It's something that caught our attention. Maybe even it came from the audience themselves. They said, whoa, they're looking at a dashboard and they're like, what's going on with this metric here? It's dipping, went down or it spiked. So that's the hook of our story. That starts us down a new path. And then what we do is we build up to our aha moment, which is our main takeaway, and that's part of the challenge when you're building a data story is, what is that main takeaway that we're trying to convey to the audience? What's the one thing we want them to remember after we've shared all this data with them? And so it's really important to focus on what is our main takeaway? What is our main insight or aha moment? And then what we do is if we started with the hook and we need to build up to the aha moment, what kind of data do we need? Supporting details do we need to help the audience understand what's going on? So it's almost like we're peeling the onion. We're going into these layers, building up to the aha moment, and now we're not done once we've shared the aha moment. Because one of the things you'll notice in the title of my book, it's not just effective data storytelling. It's how do we drive change with data, narrative, and visuals. And so I'm a big proponent of driving action from the data. And so the last step in that kind of that framework that I had there is, okay, so what are the next steps? What's the solution? What's the recommendation? And so we might need to do additional analysis to kind of break down what's going on in the data. What do we recommend to the audience? There's three options. Here's option A, option B, option C. And hopefully through this process, we're helping the audience kind of make a better decision and learn more about the business. Right. So that's the narrative side. On the visual side, I think color is, a huge, when we look at our visualizations, a simple thing, if you want to draw attention in a line chart where you might have multiple time series going on at the same time, or you might have a bar chart where you want to focus on one bar, how do we make that the star of our scene? Well, we use color. We use a bold color on what we want to highlight, and then we use grayscale for everything else. So it's there from a contextual perspective, but color, is such a valuable tool, and we don't want to use it randomly. We don't want to, use too many colors. If we can focus people's attention on what's most important, color is probably one of the most valuable tools in your data storytelling toolbox?
Yes, definitely. I think that definitely answers the questions when we talk about visualization, when we talk about data storytelling, when we were actually talking about a narrative, and that's very helpful. Also, I could see a few comments from Nima. She says definitely going to grab the book. Obviously, I would highly recommend effective data storytelling. If you haven't read it, it's the time you start reading it. Brent, when's the next edition coming in?
The next edition, next book.
Yes.
I haven't talked to my publisher about other editions yet. I'm still trying to recover. So that book took me 3 years to write. It was a labor of love. I mean, I hear other authors talking, oh yeah, I did this book in 3 months or 6 months. I'm like,
Exactly.
wow. There's, it's pretty dense. There's a lot of content here.
Exactly.
And, it was a labor of love for me. And, I really invested a lot of time in it to make it happen. So right now I'm hearing of it may be translated into other languages such as Chinese and Portuguese. There may be other languages out there. Wow. When you launch a book in a pandemic, you don't have the luxury of speaking at conferences,
exactly.
And so you can't really, sell as many books because you're not attending conferences in person and stuff. So it's been a kind of a more of a longer journey to kind of promote the book, and I'll continue to promote it because, I think this is an important skill that we all need. And, I think that there's, some good techniques and frameworks in my book that can really help people. So, yeah.
No, yes, definitely. If people are not hearing this conversation, I would urge everyone to go and hear out the conversation first and then maybe pick up the book, because definitely after reading the book, I was blown away because it was so easy, first thing, to understand about what you exactly mean by data storytelling and why it should be effective. And the examples you have shared are outstanding. Me being, my full-time job obviously is with a publisher, and I read books, I go through them, I see how easily and how dense they have been written. And obviously your book taking 3 years, I can totally imagine such a masterpiece will need 3 years to be out, and it will need some more amplification obviously in the market. But great book. Thanks for writing such an amazing book, Brent. Also, there was a quick question from Alberto. Very interesting. Best approach or tips to recover audience during a presentation? Do you have any, Brent?
Yeah, I think sometimes we go into these situations where we're presenting, maybe we have our data story and we're really excited to present it. And for whatever reason, it's not resonating with the audience. And so I think the key thing is, we may want to force our insight on an audience, but we need to stop and say, wait a second, if this insight isn't resonating with the audience, I need to understand why it isn't. And maybe even say, you know what, it doesn't sound like this insight isn't that important to you, but I would use it as an opportunity to say, okay, so what is important to you? What are the priorities, that you have right now? And then sometimes, when you have a data story, you obviously, you're not walking people through your analysis. I call it the analyst journey, and a lot of, I've sometimes even seen people talk about that as being a data story, and it's not. I imagine, you've got an executive in front of you and you're saying, okay, first what I did is I merged these two data sets, and then I went through this cleansing process, and then I started to analyze this and this segment of customers, and I couldn't find anything. And then I went, you've already lost them. They don't care.
Exactly.
It's like explaining how you bake the cake. They just want to eat the cake. They don't care about what's, how you sifted the flour or, all these other things. They just want to eat the cake. And so, but with that, to your point, Alberto, when you say, how do I recover the audience? Maybe your audience is looking for more detail than you expected. And so what you're going to have in your appendix of your data story is a bunch of other slides and information, maybe more detailed information that may be more what your audience was looking for, So I think it's the key thing I think there is to pause and find out, start asking questions of your audience. Why is this not resonating? Why are they distracted? Why, and understand that. And then you might realize, you know what, this is the wrong story, or this is a good story, but for the wrong audience. Or at this time, this story is not going to be heard because there's some other burning questions that the audience has that haven't been answered. And so, I would say that's the key thing. You need to pause and find out, and then you might be able to recover based on what you have. In the situation where they're looking for more detailed information, you have that in your appendix, and so you can recover. Or maybe you take the opportunity that you have and say, let's have a discussion about maybe where the next analysis needs to go. If this is not resonating, let's talk about what would, and use it as a discovery opportunity to learn about where you could do further analysis and where you could maybe bring something that's more meaningful to your audience.
Oh, yes, exactly. I think that would definitely help Alberto to get back and recover the audience when you talk about obviously asking the right questions to the right audience would make more sense. Or maybe, talking about a story which would be for the right audience. It matters a lot. And also, since we are talking about questions and audience here, there was a question from Taruna Patra. Before getting good at storytelling, it is important to know how to ask the right questions from the data. Obviously, how do you train people to first know what questions to ask to become better at storytelling?
Yeah, that's actually basically the three main pillars of my book. I mean, aside from the introduction and the psychology, is I go into data, narrative, and visuals. And so we haven't talked about the data chapter yet, but in the data chapter, that's what I kind of view data like a labyrinth, right? We can go into the labyrinth and get lost. And so what do we need? We need a GPS. We need a compass. We need some kind of guide because, there's more data than we can analyze, in our lifetime. And so it's really about going in with a purpose, going in with an objective to, and so I introduced a model I call the 4D model. And basically it's built around an audience and saying, okay, if we know we're presenting to the CMO or we're presenting to the CFO or we're presenting to the, chief operations officer, COO, whoever that audience is, we need to know what's important to them. What is their focus? Okay. So once we have that audience in mind, let's say it's the CMO. Okay. And we know that she's really interested in certain things. And so there's 4 dimensions, the 4Ds. So the first dimension is what problem does she have? What, maybe one problem, might be multiple problems, but what are the problems she's trying to solve today? That's what she's focused on. Okay. So we now know there's a key problem that she has with lead generation. Sales is complaining that they're not generating enough leads. Okay. So that's the first thing. The next thing is, what is the outcome that she's trying to drive? So she may have a target, a goal that she's trying to reach with her lead generation. She might say, you know what, for this quarter, we need to double the number of leads that we're generating so I can shut up the chief revenue officer. And so now we know, okay, so she's trying to double the number of leads. Okay, so now we're starting to get some context here. Now the next question is, what actions is she and her team doing to achieve this objective, to get to this future state that's desirable? And so then we might look at, okay, well, they're really focused on doing a lot more digital kind of marketing because, COVID and all that, it's got to shift to more digital. Maybe they're going to start doing some online events and virtual events. And so that's a big thing. And maybe they're reevaluating some of their vendors, their agency partners. Okay, so now we've got some targets in terms of these are the specific areas that she's investing budget, that she's got resources to. These are areas that are going to be in her purview and really top of mind for her. And then the last thing, the last dimension are the KPIs. So, okay, well, it might be cost per lead. It might be number of leads. It might be how many, leads to opportunities, all those kinds of things that help to kind of frame out what she's trying to do. Now, as we go into the data, I'm not looking at random crap. No, I have a mission. I have an agenda. I have a mission. I'm, going back to asking the right questions. I'm focused. I'm not going to go off into these weird tangents. I know exactly
Right.
what she needs. And so I have a mission, I have a purpose. And so that's why I have the right questions. And then what that gives me is then I'm going to have insights that she's going to care about, that she's going to want
Mm.
to hear. She's going to want to hear my story, my data story.
Yes.
And so I think that's the key thing. You got to have kind of a construct or something that's going to help you as you go into
Mm.
the data, because there's again, as I said earlier, there's more data that we can analyze in our lifetimes, and so it's really
Mm-hmm.
about prioritizing, right? And so if we
Right.
can prioritize
Right.
what we focus on, that's going to make us more effective. Again, effective data storytelling.
Yes, exactly. I think that makes a lot of sense when you talk about four dimensions, maybe problems, then talking about the outcome, then also focusing on actions, and then again coming back to result oriented. That and then again understanding what was the purpose. So that makes a lot of sense and definitely answers Taruna's question. Also, there was an interesting question from YouTube by Daksh Kinvasra. I'm planning to learn data storytelling. Would you recommend your book for beginners? How would it help me in my financial career? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, no, I do recommend it for beginners. It'll give you lots of good insights. It's not technical. I don't focus on,
Mm.
I'm not going to teach you Tableau. I'm not going to teach you, Power BI. The basic, the lowest common denominator for this, all of the visualizations, almost like I would say 95% of the visualizations are created by me in Excel. So these are, I feel like Excel is a ubiquitous tool, and
Yes.
people, anybody has access to Excel, and a lot of the principles then, you might say, well, I'm big into Tableau. Well, it translates. A lot of what I teach and these are principles that are, it doesn't matter what platform you're on. So absolutely, I think it is a great book for beginners. And then in terms of finance, I
Yes.
would say besides analytics teams that I've talked a lot to, I think the next biggest audience that I've talked to in terms of data storytelling are actual people in finance. A lot of I've done a lot of presentations to finance teams, and often the people asking for me to present on data storytelling are the executives, the CFOs,
Exactly.
the VPs of finance, because they're frustrated that their direct reports and their teams are providing them with lots of very detailed information, almost like too much information. Like it's data
Mm.
overload. And what they want their teams to understand and appreciate, especially as the CFO asks these people, the people in his
Exactly.
finance team to present to other business teams, is like you got to distill it down to a core
Yeah.
message, core communication, and so they're really interested in improving the data storytelling skills of their finance teams.
Fantastic. I think that very well ties in the earlier answer that you said, Brent, that you need to prioritize your data very well, and that is a big problem, not only for executives but also for people who are in data. That you need to understand that this is the data, and you need to prioritize this, and you need to put the crux in front of the audience, and it is very much easier for them to understand. So that makes a lot of sense. Also, since we were talking a little about future, there was a question from Asta Mujmar. How can you see the future of data storytelling in the coming 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, I think it's a skill set that more people will pick up, and
Yeah.
that we'll see more and more people kind of practicing good data storytelling. So I'm hopeful that, and one of the things, kind of with this new expertise, you might see some organizations kind of establish data storytellers within their business. And I see this
Mhm.
as not a, it's not a long-term role where we're always going to have data storytellers as a separate role. But I think in some
Yeah.
cases, having people, kind of leading the way, demonstrating the power of taking data, analyzing it, and then turning it into data stories will help everybody else to kind of like, oh, wow, this is something I should be doing. I can learn from these
Yeah.
people. So I think you will see some people kind of step into kind of a dedicated data storyteller role, where they may even work with different teams to kind of help them do analysis, and then take their analysis they've already done and help them communicated effectively within the organization. I
I
think
think, yeah,
I think the other thing we're going to start to see, and I've been kind of waiting for this, and I haven't really seen. I've seen little bits and pieces of this happening where companies. I mean, think about all of the data that a lot of companies have. You think of airlines, you think of retailers, you think of service companies. I mean, they're all collecting a great deal of information, or even product companies. With their now the IoT data. They have rich data that they can not only use internally, but they can actually communicate and share back to customers, right? So imagine you're a car
yeah,
company and you're looking at patterns of users across all of your customer base. And then you can start to say, you know what? We noticed that, you're driving in the fourth gear a lot. If you just went up to the
right,
fifth gear, or maybe your oil changes, you notice you're not changing your oil as much as you should, and then you're actually having higher repair costs, whatever it is. There's lots of valuable data that companies are collecting that then could be something they could share back to their customers and add it as a value added benefit of being, a customer of this company. And I'm, we've seen a little bit of that done with Spotify, how they kind of share at the end of the year how your music choices and kind of the pattern and stuff. So you get a little taste of it, but I still feel like there's so much more potential there for companies to take this big mountain of data and think about, how can we provide insight back to our customers in maybe an automated fashion and help them to kind of learn more about, how to be a better customer
mm,
or how to use the product more effectively. I think that could be a huge thing. And then you're going to continue to see technology providers saying, we can automate storytelling. I'm probably a little bit more skeptical because I think what happens, I still feel like this is a skill set that people need to be involved in. Obviously, if we can
yeah,
use technology to augment what we're doing in terms of like if it can help with our analysis and can
yeah,
help us get to insights faster, that's amazing. But actually communicating those insights, it's not just about turning visualizations into words. That's
right.
why do we even have the visualizations then if they're not communicating effectively? Why do we need to turn it into text? That makes no sense. So I
Exactly.
really think it's about human beings being involved and they know the audience, they know the context. One of the challenges I think for
Right.
data storytelling being automated is that, I've been in situations where, I found something in the data, something happened, and then I share that with the audience, and then they tell me, oh, that's because we launched this thing, or PR did a press release, or, this happened. And
Yeah.
that's not in the data. That's not in a data set. That's that's in the news, or that's in the, these other things. And so, I think we will see more technology, coming into
Yeah.
data storytelling, but I'm more on the camp of augmentation rather than replacing or automating, creating
Mm.
automated storytellers.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense, and a fantastic question by Asta. Obviously, okay. There are many questions. Obviously, Brent, and I can talk to you forever. But I'll take one last question from Neeraj Satpal. A very interesting question. Do you reckon many companies tend to put creativity in the backseat while making room for ever-growing amounts of data and analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I think creativity sometimes is put in the back seat. But I think in terms of creativity, in terms of your analysis, creativity in terms of your
Mm.
storytelling, that can be so powerful, in terms of finding really amazing insights and really getting your message across. I think creativity is something that should be valued, especially when it comes to
Yeah.
data storytelling, because at the end of the day, it's all about finding insights that can help the business move forward. And sometimes, they're not sitting in front of us. They're not just waiting to be picked up. They're not on the top of the
Yeah.
pile. They're buried way down. And, there's all these obstacles and things. And so we need to be creative. We need to have creative approaches to find insights. And then, I've seen in many of my presentations, the more creative that I can be without, obviously making things more complex or anything, but creativity will be rewarded, and will be remembered, right? That's the thing. People remember things that are novel, or that, that are not just repetitive, just the same old, things that are unique or novel will stand out. And so creativity on both those fronts, and I talk about it being the art and science of data storytelling. There's the science side, but there's also the art, and I think that's where the creativity can be used and applied.
Exactly. And that's what, in your book too, there's so much. When I earlier told it's very unique, that's because you have used your creativity very well. You've used those examples, which obviously no other data storytelling book has. They have a different story, obviously, but that creativity, uniqueness is in Brent Dykes' book. So everyone who's watching today, I think definitely highly recommend Brent's book. Also, Brent, a quick question from my end. I just wanted to know, who are your favorite data people around?
Yeah, I mean, I really admire Thomas Davenport. He's done a lot of work, like competing on analytics and analytics at work. I mean, he's a great thought leader. There's so many people out there. I mean, I mentioned Stephen Few and Tufte. Trying to think who else. I mean, there's a lot. What's that?
Forward writer.
He's great too. I mean, he's put a lot of work into, coming up with data strategy, a lot of thought leadership out there. So again, I was fortunate to have him as my forward writer. So definitely. Yeah.
But fantastic talking to you. But Brent, a quick question for the audience, actually, that I would ask you is, where can we find you? If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you? Which is the best place?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay. That's a great place. You can, if you're interested in my book and you're kind of on the fence, you can go to effectivedatastorytelling.com and you can see my book there. And, I'll be launching a course in probably the coming months that'll be based on the material in my book. So you can, I'll have announcements and things when that's available. And so if you want to upskill your data storytelling skills, that's coming. I'm also offering next week, this is through my company, Blast Analytics. I'm offering a masterclass. It's more of a live presentation. We'll be doing an hour and a half for 4 weeks. And so you can go check that out. That's at blastanalytics.com. I think we'll be closing signups pretty soon, but I think we're still accepting registrations for that. So yeah, there's different ways to connect with me, and I'm excited to be out there and evangelizing the power of data storytelling.
Yes, definitely. And looking forward to the masterclass as well. What I would do is definitely share the link with the folks in the same post, so they can register for the Blast Analytics masterclass. I would register it myself too. Is it on the website itself, Brent?
Yeah, I'll get a link and I'll share it in the show. You can. Yeah, I should have had that ready, but I don't. But we can get that out.
Maybe I have it. Okay, let me just have a look at it. Yes, Blast Analytics. This is the website, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I'll get the link. I'll get it.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I'll share that out.
Sounds good. Okay, so it was fantastic talking to you, Brent. Thanks for the amazing stories you've shared about effective data storytelling, about your experiences, about how people can actually, understand that this is just not a buzzword. Obviously, I don't think anyone does feel it's anymore a buzzword, but a great chat with you. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining in and asking amazing questions. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, everybody.